Hello and welcome to this session entitled Data Protection and Subject Access Requests, an update with me, Keith Marker. Let's have a look at the agenda because we've got a lot to get through in this session as usual. So we'll start off by just reminding ourselves of some of the basics. So we'll look at the places where we can find guidance in respect of this particular topic. We'll also go through the basic rules in terms of the rights that data subjects have in respect of subject access. Once we've done that briefly, we will then go on to talk about what I call the requirements. So essentially, we could also perhaps call this formalities in terms of things that essentially have to be complied with before the request can actually be dealt with. So things like looking at how a controller will recognize a request of this sort, looking at checking things like identification, looking at issues around perhaps clarification of the nature of the request. Can we charge a fee, for example, as well? And also timing issues in terms of how long the controller has. So we'll go through all of those things. After that, we'll then look at the fact that if we are a controller, we are required to make a reasonable search in terms of what documentation we hold about the data subjects, and we'll go through what a reasonable search entails, what sort of types of files need to be looked at, and also what sort of data potentially needs to be extracted from that. After that, we'll then go on to talk about the fact that there are indeed a series of exemptions. So in certain cases, we can withhold some or part of the personal data for reasons such as legal professional privilege, for example, also third-party rights, which we're going to look at in the light of a recent High Court decision, and so on. Once we've applied the exemptions, obviously we are then left with a certain amount of information in front of us. We then need to decide how we're going to physically provide that to the data subject. And we'll look at, is it a requirement to provide data? Is it a requirement to provide documents? Are there various ways of doing that? Well, we'll see there are, and we need to think about which of those might be most appropriate. And then finally, we will look at one rather unfortunate example in terms of enforcement. It's interesting to note that around about 46% of complaints in respect of breaches of data protection related legislation are in respect of this topic of subject access requests, albeit it is also important to note that ultimately there has never been a monetary penalty notice levied in respect of it. So no fines to date. What we will find, though, is that we do occasionally see reprimands, typically where there's been a fairly sort of heinous breach of the rules. At the end of today, we will look at a particular example involving an organisation you may have heard of. They're called the Labour Party. So there we are.